folks. Welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies across industries. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy by acting as their fractional security organization. I'm excited to be talking to Mike Berkman today. Mike is a technologist who started his career as an engineer in Cisco. Following, he leaned into a career in tech companies, joining growth health tech company CoverMyMeds. We actually worked together there, where 3 months later, we were sold to McKesson for $1.4 billion. Few dollars. Later, Mike co-founded startup Elite, where he served as CTO and saw the company through its life cycle. Now Mike has taken a later stage startup, ScriptDrop, to a transaction, and it is the Chief Product and Technology Officer of ScriptDrop as a division within GoodRx. Thanks for being here today, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Warner. Good to see you again.
Well, you've had a breadth of experience. Public companies, startup, growth companies. You started your career in a big publicly traded company with about 75,000 employees. Then you went to a growth company, CoverMyMeds. What was that like?
Yeah, great question. That was a bit of a culture shock for me, to be honest. Coming out of college, I thought Silicon Valley, big company, like that's where I wanted to be. So I did the Cisco systems thing for a while, which was great. Like you mentioned, massive organization, tons of products, kind of a huge machine, right? And when I left and got involved in this startup in Columbus where I was living, 300 people, I was like, what am I getting myself into exactly here? It felt a little bit more like the Wild West, and I was used to more rigorous process and whatnot. So that was a big adjustment, but it was a lot of fun because I was able to provide a ton of my knowledge and expertise in what I'd seen that worked really well and where more organization is helpful. I felt like I was able to bring a lot to that experience.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because it's frankly just really difficult to replicate. Having 300 people with really loose process but working effectively, and a big reason for that is we just hired so darn well. We hired the best. But I worked with and seen folks like you were at the time coming from a big company to effectively a startup. What did you have to do? What changes or what learning? How were you able to make that transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that one of the things that has served me well in my career is my adaptability and flexibility. So when I came over, while I had been in a big org and I had, I would say, a more well-defined role at Cisco, I leaned into what needs to happen to help move the organization forward. What do I need to do in my role? And how can I flex and help fill the space to help move the org forward? If that's get in and really understand the technical, the nitty gritty, I was happy to do that. If it was working cross-functionally, like trying to build and establish some processes between account management and engineering or helping to establish a product discipline, like I was happy to do that. So while I had a engineering lens the whole time, I was always looking for what's the biggest problem I can help solve for the org.
What I'd highlight is looking from the perspective of impact. You weren't looking at it from the perspective of this is my role and this is my area of responsibility. You're like, how can I help? And hearing you say that makes me think of the corporate folks I've known and worked with who just stay in this box.
Yeah.
And define the role so rigidly, that doesn't work in a company like CoverMyMeds was at the time.
I think that's an easy trap to fall into. It's like, this is what my role is defined to do, and this is what I do, and I don't go outside of my lane. I think it's helpful to kind of take a look at what are my experiences, what are my skill sets, where do I sit, what can I help with? And again, yeah, focusing on the impact part is how I've taken that approach.
Hard to go wrong when someone's making an impact professionally or otherwise. So you took it weird going from big company to effectively startup. I'd call it a growth company, but certainly coming from Cisco, it was
Absolutely.
a
It felt like a
startup.
startup.
Yeah, it was. It was a
Yeah.
300-person startup. And then you made it even weirder after CoverMyMeds, going from a growth company to a concept stage startup, completely different worlds. What's it like building a company that early as a technical co-founder?
Yeah, I don't know that was ever on my bingo card. I've been entrepreneurial kind of my whole life, but I never thought I would start a company, and especially at that stage of my career. I always thought of it as something you do when you're fresh out of college or something. So to have been in my career for 10 or 12 years at that point, it felt radical to me. And yeah, it's kind of interesting going from 75,000 at Cisco to 300. That 300 grew to 1,500 organically. And then when the McKesson acquisition brought all the groups together, it was 5,000 by the time I left, and then went to a three-person. So, interesting reverse stepping stone.
And you
I
were
was
responsible for 100 people during your time at the end of your time at CoverMyMeds too. So you were managing a big organization.
Yeah, I was leading an engineering team for one of the kind of new, faster growing segments of the organization, which is a lot of fun, but it was a very different set of challenges and focuses. It was organizational design and structure. It was cross-functional optimization, engineering, working with product, working with program management and account management and others, and leading people at scale. To go from that to co-founding a company and being CTO and being the only or one of the only technical people on the team because we were so small was a big jump. But I was motivated by the opportunity to build a company and to solve a problem and to get my hands dirty again. I was really missing that at the end of my time at CoverMyMeds. So definitely one of the drivers for me.
Yeah, it doesn't get much dirtier than that. It doesn't matter the role in a team of three in a true startup. So you were building the early product. What was that like? How do you get back to being hands-on after managing a team of 100, organization of 100, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I had to dust off my skill set a little bit. It had gotten a little bit stale, as it does if you're transitioning into leadership day to day.
Completely different roles.
Completely different. Completely different. And as a leader, I actively try to stay out of the hands-on technical because I think that can cause some interesting conflicts at times. Although that might be shifting, and we can maybe talk about that later. But yeah, going into kind of day-to-day hands-on was really mentally stimulating. It got me back into a different kind of problem-solving mode that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, there's a reason why one of our company values at Gamma Force is we're always learning. But you talking about that, it's in we have this misconception in our culture, old dogs don't learn new tricks. And the thing is, we can retrain our brain at any point. Brain elasticity, neuroscience research has come a long way from when we thought sections of the brain were only capable of certain things. You were getting your brain going again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, stretching it in old ways that were new again.
Yeah, for folks who want to get nerdy about neuroscience, one of the first books I read that introduced me to the concept of brain elasticity is The Brain That Changes Itself. Super interesting. Shoot, concept stage, building product. I think I want to talk a little bit more about the time of Elite because
Yep.
I'm so deep in the startup world. It's just innate to me now. But I think when we talk about startups, it's really easy for us to talk about a growth company with 300 headcount, like CoverMyMeds at the time, and a company like Uli, which is concept stage team of three, essentially a pitch deck and a dream.
Yeah.
Those are very different things. So can you just talk a little more about some of the things you did during your time at Elite? And the company, you built product, got some early traction. Just talk a bit
Yeah.
more about that life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to frame in the time period a little bit, this was late 2021. From a VC standpoint, money felt more accessible, certainly, than it is today. It was a pretty big, ambitious concept that we were going after for three first-time co-founders. I think that's an interesting lesson. We spent a lot of time trying to refine the concept. It was a tricky one to build because we were actually looking at building a mechanism for incentivizing healthy behavior, healthy lives through an healthcare insurance company. So when you think about that's whoa, the health insurance company being the economic engine for the whole product, but how do you do that? So it was a pretty big leap. There were some signals that we had some areas where we could follow a rough pattern, but it was a lot of trying to define what this is going to look like, what's the slice, and then a lot of fundraising, which is never fun. It's a real challenge and it's a big distraction too. So I think that was an interesting lesson because to build the healthcare company, we needed a significant amount of capital. We had raised some angel funding, which was great to get us going, but we would have needed on the order of tens of millions of dollars to get something off the ground. So that consumed a significant amount of our time and pulled us away from the product itself, which is probably where we could or should have spent a little bit more of our time.
Yeah, and at a certain point, bringing on outside capital, it turns into a full-time job for one of
It
the
does.
founding team members, usually the startup CEO. And I always usually it's non-negotiable. There's always cycles and how risk-seeking capital is and a lot of macroeconomic factors. But I always encourage early-stage companies to spend as much time on the business, with customers
Yep.
as they can, because once on that path, like you said, it's a whole lot of work.
It really does. It pulls you away. So that was an interesting experience. Met a ton of people, which was great. But yeah, pulled away from the product, pulled away from those really strong signals that we were on the right path, maybe. So lesson learned. Not for the faint of heart, no.
So at ScriptDrop, you've been helping mature the startup, yet another startup at
Yep.
a different stage, though,
Yep.
helping mature it as a member of a small executive team. And you've been working with ScriptDrop over 4 years now. And your work has been a meaningful part of getting ScriptDrop to a transaction. As CTO, what did it take to get the company to that point?
From a technology perspective, the organization had built a lot of what I would consider a core product by the time I got there. So it was less about build it like rapid building to kind of fill the gaps. It was fine tuning more than anything. It was a lot of security and compliance work and partnering with Gamma Force to kind of level up the organization's kind of security posture and make sure that we would be ready when the time came for a potential acquisition and that there was no dispute that we were doing things the right way. So fortunately, I think we were in a pretty good spot, but we definitely had areas where we were working together to kind of fine tune things. I think the other interesting thing was, and maybe kind of harkens back to my previous response about kind of filling in where the gaps are. I probably spent more of my time working cross-functionally with the rest of the business to try to help drive sales, try to help with account management, operations, logistics, but bringing that kind of technical perspective where I could be the translator between kind of what is within the product and the tech stack and kind of where we needed to go for the business. So that was a lot of my time.
I love that. When I think about technical leadership roles, one of the big distinctions for me when I think of a CTO, it's being market facing, being a part of the first team, the executive team, as a team member, right?
Yep.
And not just as a person who shows up and can talk tech, but you're the team who's building and growing and setting the strategy for the company.
That's right. It was a lot of meeting with customers, talking with the board, talking with investors, preparing diligence decks and being ready for potential diligence and translating the technical direction into something that can be consumed by other roles.
Yeah, and good of you to do that. I think that's one of the key distinctions of whether or not somebody's capable of transitioning to a executive level, because you can't just be a technologist. Even in a tech company, you need to be able to help work on the company, bring it forward.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting. We've touched on literally every part of a life cycle of a company in our conversation here. Incredible depth of experience you
Yeah.
have in your career. I think in just knowing what I know of how things can be post-transaction, I think some of your earliest career skills at the big company are probably coming to the forefront again. Talk about the transition from startup to acquired company. What's that? You're responsible for product now.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been a fun transition. We were acquired officially back in October of 25. So I guess we're at 7 months or whatever that is at this point
Still
when we're
fresh.
recording. Still fresh. It feels like years and it also feels like minutes at the same time. A lot of the focus has been on the integration into the broader organization. So GoodRx is 700 plus employees, large technical organization, something like 200 plus in kind of their product design and tech group. We kind of came over wholesale as like a new business unit. And so we've been operating still in that fashion. But if you think about integrating all of our T platforms, getting integrated with security and compliance, and making sure that all of our policies align, getting machines set up on their MDM, just so many things also outside of building a product, right? That take just a lot of time, a lot of educating the broader org on, okay, this is exactly what we do and what we don't do, and here's where we can plug in, and here's where we understand what your priorities are, and now that gives us a target of maybe something we can move toward as well. So a lot of educating on both sides of the fence, if you will, has been a lot. And then just advocating for what we need to continue to be successful. So we've had an opportunity to kind of grow the team, which has been great. Some things we had to hold off on pre-acquisition, but now we're able to introduce some new team members in, which has been a breath of fresh air and always great to get new ideas and new perspectives in. So that's been really good. And yeah, right at the same time we were making the transition in, I also took on product responsibilities. As a technical leader, I've always been product adjacent, I would say, working hand in hand, arm in arm with product. And now my shift has focused to probably 90% product and then 10% engineering. So I have a very strong engineering leader under me that I've been letting run, and I've been trying to help shore up a little bit more of the product focus.
And thank you for sharing that. I know, so as humans, we often get caught up on events. It's need to sell the company, but we don't always talk about the what happens after.
Yeah.
What's that like? And that experience is so valuable. It's interesting too. You're not the first CTO I've known to transition more into a product focus post acquisition.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, you've done it all, Mike. You've seen all the life cycles of a tech company. What would you share for those aspiring to be a tech executive in a tech company?
I would say be adaptable and try to take the broadest view you possibly can of the business. I think if you're too narrowly focused on just an implementation or what the trends are in engineering, you're going to kind of miss the bigger picture of technology is just a means to deliver value for an organization. And to best do that, you need to understand exactly what the organization's objectives are, what the constraints are, how how the sausage gets made, broadly speaking, and how can you pull on those different levers. I think that's where a lot of the value is.
Like in more traditional corporate IT circles, used to use words like IT in the business, and I had no patience for those words,
Yeah.
right? Because in tech companies building tech products, our perspective's so different. In that case, it's the business and tech are very closely aligned. But I think the point you share is just as relevant in a tech company because I've seen people, tech leaders and title only, who weren't able to mature with the company and their role in a tech company, where they're just so hyper focused on the tech. And I think we need to be really good at technology in a tech
Yep.
company.
Yep.
It's a tech
Table
company,
stakes.
but the business the thing that's bringing revenue that pays all the salaries and pays the cloud infrastructure as a service bills and so on and so forth without that. And in big companies, I don't think it's productive, but can have the luxury of being deep in an organization, not having that context. But in a tech company, you need to know the business. Tech
You
is
gotta, otherwise it's a hobby and it can be a trap. It's, oh, this is fun to work on. Hey, look, I'm all for fun things to do and explore. And again, it's like that continuous learning mindset, but it's got to be driving you towards something. It's got to be driving the business forward. Otherwise, maybe it could be counterproductive.
so true. And along those lines, we're seeing a ton of change.
Yep.
Change is constant, but I'd say we're seeing more change in technology than we have in a long time between SaaS, Gen AI. Some folks are using the word SaaSpocalypse, which I take exception to, but
Yeah.
I'll avoid the soapbox. Where do you see tech companies going in the future, Mike?
That's interesting. I think tech companies are always going to be important. I don't think the company element, no, I don't see that necessarily changing. I think the individuals in the technology organization, I do think that obviously is shifting. I think where it's going to be really hard is if you are an individual who's of the mindset of I do this one thing and I do this one thing really well, it might be a little bit tough as things continue to evolve. I think everybody kind of needs to broaden their view, in my opinion. Everybody has to become a mini CTO, even at the engineer level. You got to understand the business. You got to understand where the money comes from, what the customer's needs are, what problems you're actually trying to solve. And it's going to be harder and harder just to kind of go heads down in your IDE or whatever, building something. That's getting commoditized very quickly. Problem solving is still critically important and understanding the customer and all that.
Yeah, something my team and I have been saying a lot. My CTOO actually coined this, but I've been saying it a whole lot, is humans still own the decisions, right?
Yeah.
We can't outsource critical thinking. And I think as we go through this technology paradigm shift, it's to your point, like where's the value being created? Thinking about that is more important than ever. But I'll tell you what, like where I'm seeing the most impact value, the most value being created with the Gen AI technologies we're building right now is with my CTO friends and colleagues. I think why, and I'm curious your take on this, Mike. I think why is if we think about the archetype of a really good software engineer, it tends to be more introverted, more analytical, very much a problem-solving skill set. And of course, people are different. There's all
Yep.
sorts of software engineers, but it's a common pattern we see. And and now if we think about what it takes to build really good Gen AI code, it's more of a process. I think of it the same way I would building an engineering organization.
Yep.
So those who not only have technical, but also have organizational skills, I think are leaning into it more. And
Yes.
when we are missing one of those, that's where the output is less consistent. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think the people that are having a lot of early success are systems thinkers. They can like kind of zoom out, look at the system, find the bottlenecks, attack the bottlenecks, move on to the next, look at it as broadly as possible, which is, I think that's a skill that can be developed, but it's definitely a mindset shift and a paradigm shift. And I would encourage people to dig in there if they can.
I'm curious. I've tried to teach people that sort of thinking before. I've spent a lot of energy on that over the years, and I've not had much success. And I science is on the fence, nature, nurture, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't take a strong position there. I'm just talking about my own experience. Have you had different experience? How do you think somebody could be taught systems thinking?
As soon as I said that, I was thinking about back to some previous conversations I've had. For example, Vicky Muscarella, who's one of my kind of mentors and someone I've learned a ton from. We've talked about this over the years. Is it something that can be developed, or is it just something that somebody innately has? But I know that's going to be very important going forward. Maybe as we're evolving as an organization within ScriptDrop and we're asking developers to step more outside of their lane than they historically have, it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes along.
And my take is smart, capable humans.
Yep.
There's tons of opportunity for them in
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
company and
Absolutely.
everywhere.
Yep.
But I do think we will redefine a lot of roles. So that analytical person, if we need systems thinking and organizational management process skills to build tech and product software, maybe the person who is analytical is filling a different role then. I think that's where I'm seeing some of the conflict,
Yeah.
though, for the engineer who likes doing what they do and doesn't want to change. And I can empathize with that. But I think it's helpful for the profession to be candid about
Yeah.
things like that. It's okay to
I think
change.
you're hitting on something really interesting there. It's always been an overlap of what does the organization need and what does the individual like or prefer to do, and sometimes those don't match. I think that's where the conflict can be, right? Developers are developers today because they like writing code and they like solving problems in that way. They may have skills that can translate into other roles. They may not have interest in doing those roles. So it's going to come down to that. Is that individual willing or interested in adapting, or what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's a paradigm shift too.
Absolutely.
Even us building this stuff, we're not exactly sure where we're going to go. We're still solving a lot of the interim problems. I look at the way we built software before as the old meta problem.
Yeah.
It may remain in some form, but it's transitory
Yep.
in the way we're operating right now. Where will we be at the end of that? I'm not quite sure. So,
If
but
I wish I knew.
yeah,
I wish I
yeah.
knew. If you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah, because I get bored with transitory problems.
Yeah.
I'm more, at this point, I'm more interested in the end result. And I do think many of us are working on the big parts of that problem. We're building LLMs and solving different parts of it. But for those of us who are getting focused on the meta problems, they're going to change. They're
Yep.
changing every day. So
Yes. Yep.
cool, Mike. It's been an amazing conversation. I wouldn't have expected any differently. Do you have any closing thoughts, books, anything you'd like to share with our audience?
Um, Maybe just a closing thought is as we think about the transition and where things are going, I had a really interesting conversation this week with Nate Lusher, who is again like a fantastic sounding board for me and a great colleague and partner. But we were talking about like where do the constraints go? If you're able to go from shipping 20 features a week to 100 features a week, what becomes the new constraint? And it's a lot around what can the customer consume? Just because you can ship 100 features a week doesn't mean that they're going to be able to take advantage of that, nor should you even be shipping 100 features a week because they may not all be high value. So then you have to get really good at knowing what to say yes to when you're building because it's going to be so easy to do it. You're just going to get a bloated code base, you're going to get a ton of complexity, but yeah, the problem is going to shift to, are we sure we should be doing this? And then it kind of goes back to a little bit more of a strong product mindset.
Thanks for dropping that knowledge bomb to
Yeah.
close this out, Mike. There's so much insight in what you just shared. So I hope everyone takes an opportunity to reflect on it.
Awesome.
Thank you all for listening to Project Gamma, presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes.